I only have two problems with IndefatigableTheist's video on omniscience and free will. First, she appears to contradict herself by claiming that we don't have the power to do otherwise, while also claiming that we do have the power to do otherwise.
Premise 1, if God knows I will do X, I will do X. Premise 2, God knows I will do X. Conclusion, I do X. But regardless of their differences, I think having options and having your own desire to do something comprise a more than sufficient definition of free will, and both of these elements can be present if an omniscient deity exists. It's still fair to ask, though, if there is an omniscient being in existence, is the future determined? I would say yes. Because he knows the whole future, I would say yes, the future is determined. It's determined because it can't be any different from what God knows about it. Why is being able to act of our own desires and having the choice to do or not do something not sufficient to say we have free will?
Secondly, she tries to escape the dilemma by holding to compatibilism. According to IndefatigableTheist, an action is free if it was in your will to do it. But of course, you didn't choose for that to be in your will. It doesn't make sense for God to deal out punishments and rewards on this basis, any more than it would make sense for him to judge people based on race or where they were born. Derezzed83 created an abomination in which he spends almost 6 minutes responding to two arguments no one has ever used. His first point is that if you know a window is going to break tomorrow, that doesn't mean your knowledge itself is going to shatter a window without it ever being touched by anything. Well, no shit. Derezzed83's second point is that just because God knows you will do X, that doesn't mean you would have to do X even if God didn't know you would do X. Again, no shit. It's a mystery as to why either of these responses were ever thought of. The actual argument is that if God has knowledge of some event, that event cannot occur in a way that is contrary to how God knows it will occur. In other words, that which is true cannot be false. This is true by definition. It's amazing that Derezzed83 still argued with me at length about this. He either misunderstood me or he's insane. So, if it is the case that God knows you will do X, you will necessarily do X. But obviously the necessity of doing X no longer holds if it is not the case that God knows you will do X. What I'm saying is that for all worlds in which God knows you will do X, you will necessarily do X. To say otherwise would be contradictory. So it should be obvious that my argument does not commit a modal scope fallacy. However, as you can see from my comments and Derezzed's replies, it appears that Derezzed may have understood what I was saying, yet still disagreed in order to defend a contradiction. The point of the argument is that if God has foreknowledge of your choices, then you cannot do otherwise. Somehow Animating Rebel and Derezzed misinterpreted the argument as saying that you can't choose what you didn't choose. This is because they are assuming the B theory of time, and that every choice initiates backward causation all the way back to the boundary of time. So for them, God's knowledge comes after our choice has already been made, so it isn't really foreknowledge at all. The argument that I used against omniscience and free will was not even intended to apply to this view, or the view that God is outside of time. However, Peter Van Inwagen has made an argument against free will that is meant to apply to a non-temporal God, which I will link to below. But anyway, Animating Rebel misrepresented me by acting as though his position was assumed in my argument, when there is a much more common theistic view that he has ignored. Another hilarious fail in Derezzed's video is when he says nothing would happen if the argument against omniscience and free will works. How could an argument prove that there is a contradiction while simultaneously proving nothing? If free will and omniscience are contradictory, then you cannot have both. One of them must be rejected, which is exactly what the argument seeks to prove. He even provides a quote that makes this clear. Peter Van Inwagen says you would have to abandon omniscience.